A tale of choices. For every woman who stayed small so long, she forgot she was the whole sky. Chapter 1. Stitched tight. The studio smelled like possibility. It always had. From the first day Andrea Brasson had unlocked the door of the narrow, converted space on Edgewood Avenue, back when the walls were still someone else's beige, and the floors still held the ghost of a nail salon, the smell had been there. Raw fabric and potential. The particular promise of a place that did not yet know what it was going to become. She had made it something. She had been making it something for 7 years, thread by thread, client by client, season by unforgiving season, in the hours before Atlanta woke up and in the hours after it went to sleep. Now the walls were exposed brick, painted the deep warm white she'd chosen herself. Bolts of silk charmeuse in burnt amber and midnight plum and a celadone green she'd sourced from a supplier in Lyon were stacked along the eastern wall in the order she needed them, not alphabetically, not by color family, but by the private logic of the collection taking shape in her head, a logic only she could read. Mood boards covered every vertical surface, magazine tiers and hand-drawn silhouettes, swatches pinned in grids of color and weight and drape, photographs of women she admired not for their fame but for the way they occupied space, fully, without apology. Post-it notes in her own handwriting covered the margins of everything. To anyone else walking through the door it looked like organized chaos. To Andrea it was language, a visual grammar she had been developing since she was 14 years old, cutting apart her mother's old dresses in their house in Macon and sewing the pieces back together in ways that said something new. She stood at the cutting table with a rotary blade in her right hand and a measuring tape draped over her left shoulder like a sash, her full figure moving with the quiet authority of a woman who had built every corner of this world herself. She was 40 years old, 5 feet tall, and had learned long ago that small did not mean invisible unless you allowed it to. She had not allowed it in the studio. In the studio she was the whole room. Her phone buzzed on the table beside the pattern weights. "You pick that thing up one more time," said Rhea Jordan from across the room. Without looking up from the serger she was threading with the focused patience of someone who had done it 500 times and had made peace with the fact that it would always require the same patience. "I am walking it to the dumpster on Peachtree myself. I will do it lovingly. I will do it with no regret." Andrea did not smile, but the corner of her mouth considered it. "It's the PR firm. The PR firm can wait until you finish that bias cut. The Paris deadline is in 6 weeks," Rhea said. "The bias cut is in front of your hands right now. Attend to what is in front of your hands." Rhea Jordan was 26 years old, long and angular where Andrea was soft and compact, with natural hair piled high on her head and retained with 2 pencils she claimed were for note-taking and used for nothing else. She had graduated from SCD with a degree in fashion merchandising and a minor in business administration, and had arrived at Andrea's studio as an unpaid intern 3 years ago because, as she had explained in her cover letter with a confidence that bordered on the impractical, she had seen Andrea's work at an Atlanta boutique pop-up and had decided that this was where she needed to be. She had never left. She had grown from intern to assistant to the person who knew the operation better than anyone alive, including Andrea, particularly when it came to deadlines, supplier contacts, client preferences, studio inventory, and the specific human geography of when Andrea was using work to avoid going home. Tonight was one of those nights. Andrea set the rotary blade down and pressed both palms flat against the cutting mat. She took the breath, the slow, deliberate one she had learned from a therapist she'd been seeing until Andrew, in the polite and reasonable way he had of shaping the world around his comfort, suggested that perhaps the money could go toward other things. She had stopped going. She had kept the breath. She thought, "Andrew is at a dinner. This is true. He told you this morning. A showcase in Buckhead, one of the luxury events the dealership puts on twice a season. You asked if you should come. He said he'd be home late and you shouldn't wait up." You understood what that meant without fully understanding what it meant. "Paris confirmed," she said. Pivoting was what she did. It was a skill she had not intended to develop. Rhea looked up from the serger and stared at her. "What?" She said it again, steadily, the way you say something you have been afraid to say aloud because saying it makes it real. Maison Bernard's showroom. Paris Fashion Week. 3rd week of October. We have a slot. The silence that followed was the loud kind, the kind that happens when a room stops moving because the air in it has shifted. Then Rhea crossed the space between them in 4 long strides and wrapped both arms around Andrea's shoulders from behind and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, unself-consciously, the way people do when the feeling is large enough to skip permission. "Paris Fashion Week," Rhea said. Her voice was careful with it, reverent, as if the words were something breakable. "Don't make it weird," Andrea said. But her eyes were bright and her hands had stopped moving and she was allowing herself, just for this moment, to feel the size of it. She thought, "This is real. You did this. 7 years and every bit of it was yours and this is real." And then the part she always did next, the part she hated, she thought of going home to tell Andrew, and the thought arrived already deflated, already knowing in advance the shape of his response, the way his attention would slide from the news to the inconvenience of it. The scheduling, the cost, the timing, all the logistical containers into which he would pour what should have been simple joy. She had stopped expecting him to match her joy. She was not sure exactly when she had stopped. The stopping had been gradual and then, at some point she could not locate complete. She straightened. She picked up the rotary blade. She had a collection to build. The house in Sandy Springs was beautiful in the specific way that showrooms are beautiful, deliberate, expensive, and only inhabited at the surface. Andrew Brosson had chosen it. He liked to choose things. He had chosen the house, the neighborhood, the countertops in the kitchen, the sectional in the living room, the painting above the fireplace that Andrea privately found cold, but had never said so because the choosing was something he needed and she had learned, incrementally and without realizing the cost of the lesson, to let him need it. She came home at 10:30 to find the kitchen light on and the rest of the house dark. Andrew was at the island in his dress shirt with the collar open and his jacket draped over the stool beside him, and he was looking at his phone with the focused, private expression of a man who was entirely somewhere else. On the counter beside him was a glass of the Pappy Van Winkle, the bottle he kept on the high shelf for himself. Not because he was possessive about liquor, but because the gesture of having something premium and reserved was part of the image he had of his own life. "Hey," she said. He looked up. And there it was, the thing she had been cataloging without naming, the micro-expression that crossed his face when she entered a room he had not prepared himself for. Not displeasure exactly. Something closer to the particular flatness of a man who has rearranged his internal furniture for someone else entirely and must now quickly rearrange it back. It lasted less than a second. She had been watching for less than a second for months. "Hey," he said. He set the phone face down on the counter, which he always did now, which he had not always done. "Didn't hear you come in. I texted from the parking lot. My phone was in my jacket." His jacket was 6 inches from his hand. She looked at it briefly and looked away. She moved to the refrigerator, not because she was hungry, but because moving gave her something to do with her body while her mind sorted through what she knew and what she was not yet ready to name. She opened the door and stood in the cold air of it. "How was the showcase?" she asked. "Good. Moved 2 Maseratis and a Bentley Continental." He said it with the particular emphasis of a man reciting an accomplishment, testing whether it would be received with the admiration he felt it deserved. She noticed that he waited a half beat for her response. She gave him the response. She had been giving it a long time. "That's great," she said. "Yeah." He picked up his glass. "Long night, though." She closed the refrigerator without taking anything out. "I got the Paris confirmation today," she said. He didn't look up. "Andrew." He was reading something on the phone he had just picked back up. "Sorry, yeah, that's good, babe. What does that mean for your fall calendar?" She stood in the kitchen of the house he had chosen and looked at the man she had married and understood, not for the first time, but with a completeness that was new, that she had told him the most significant professional news of her life, and he had responded to it the way you respond to a change in the weather. Logistically. From a distance. From wherever he actually was. She thought, "You have been here before. You have stood in this kitchen and said something that mattered and watched it not land. This is not a new feeling. What is new is that you have stopped being surprised by it." "I'm going to bed," she said. "I'll be up soon." He wasn't. Chapter 2, The New Model. Leanna Barnes had built her life on the principle that image, maintained carefully and consistently, was indistinguishable from substance. She was 29 years old, Filipino and black, with cheekbones that photographers described as architectural and a social media following of 412,000 people who believed, because she had given them every reason to believe, that she was living the life they deserved to live. Her feed was a curated mythology. Brunch tables caught in afternoon gold light, gym selfies from angles that had been studied and revised until they appeared effortless, brand partnership posts for skincare and athleisure that she delivered with the authority of someone who had done her research and just happened to have great skin. She had grown up in College Park, the daughter of a nurse and a man who fixed HVAC units until his back gave out. And she had understood early that beauty was a kind of capital that did not require collateral and paid interest in proportion to how aggressively you invested it. This was not cynicism, or it had not started as cynicism. It had started as survival intelligence, the pragmatic math of a girl who had looked around at the world available to her and decided to find its pressure points. She had met Andrew Brosson at a Buckhead dealership showcase 6 weeks ago. He had been the floor manager in a suit that fit well, showing her the interior of a pearl white Range Rover Sport with the easy confidence of a man who was very comfortable in his environment. He made her laugh twice. He looked at her the way she had learned to read men looking at her, with a hunger he was trying to dress up as admiration. She had filed him in the appropriate category, given him her Instagram handle, and forgotten about him for 3 days. Then he had followed, and then he had messaged, and then he had taken her to dinner at a restaurant in Buckhead where the bill was not something he flinched at. And she had decided that Andrew Brosson was the kind of man worth cultivating while she waited for whatever came next. She did not know he was married on the first dinner. She knew on the second, because she had looked him up in the way she looked everyone up, thoroughly and without guilt, and she had found his wife's Instagram and looked at it for a while. A clothing designer. Petite, dark-skinned, warm smile in photos that appeared less and less frequently the further back you scrolled. She had looked at the photos and felt something she recognized from a long time ago and had learned to reroute. It was the particular discomfort of being able to see another woman clearly. She had rerouted it. By the third dinner she had decided the wife was a problem that belonged to Andrew, not to her. Now it was a Tuesday night and she was texting him from her midtown apartment, lying across her bed in the light she kept warm and amber for photos, though she was not taking photos. She had been thinking about the Amex card he'd offered to set up for her, and whether the limit he'd suggested was appropriate given what she was used to, and she sent, "I need to know you're serious about this." He replied in under a minute. She counted men by their response time. Andrew was a fast responder, which meant he was anxious to please, which meant he was manageable. That was not affection, but it was useful. He wrote, "I'm serious. Let me handle it Thursday." She set the phone down and looked at her ceiling, at the ring light's soft halo on the plaster, and told herself the story she needed. This was temporary leverage. This was her using what she had while she built what she wanted. This was just how things worked for women who were paying attention. She believed it the way you believe a story you have told yourself enough times. The belief required maintenance. She did the maintenance. What she did not do was look again at the photo on his wife's Instagram, the one where Andrea Brasson was standing in her studio in front of a floor-to-ceiling mood board, not posed for the camera but caught mid-thought. One hand on a bolt of fabric and her eyes somewhere in the middle distance, with an expression that Leanna had recognized and filed away, and did not look at again. An expression that said, "I know exactly who I am." Leanna turned off her ring light and went to sleep. Rhea Jordan had not been looking for it. This was important, because it meant that what she found was undeniable. It was not the product of suspicion or jealousy or the biased searching of someone who had already decided what they were going to find. She had been at home on a Sunday evening, on her couch with her laptop and a glass of red wine, scrolling through the story of a mutual connection. A woman named Deja Lee who worked in events and documented every function she attended with the completeness of a professional archivist when she found it. It was the seventh slide in a series of photos from a Buckhead car showcase 3 weeks prior. The photo was wide-angled, a crowd shot, the kind of group image where everybody looks slightly caught. But in the background, near the window, unmistakably, Andrew Brasson. And beside him, in the specific proximity of people who have arranged themselves without thinking because proximity has become habitual. The woman from the Instagram profile Rhea had found 40 minutes later after looking up his tagged photos with the methodical patience of someone who had decided to be thorough rather than reactive. Rhea set her wine glass down and sat with the image for a long time. She thought about Andrea in the studio 2 weeks ago, going over the Paris preparations with the focused calm of a woman who had learned to live inside her work because her work was the place that always made sense. She thought about Andrea's face when she said Paris was confirmed, the 2 seconds of pure, unguarded joy before the pivot, before she put it somewhere manageable and kept moving. She thought about all the nights Andrea stayed late and all the mornings she arrived early and all the ways Rhea had watched her make herself small in the telling of important things, phrasing her accomplishments as updates rather than announcements, making news into logistics so that someone else in the room did not have to do the work of celebrating. She sat with the photo for a day. Then she sat with it for another. On Wednesday she texted Andrea, "Are you free for lunch? Auburn Avenue spot. My treat." Andrea said yes because she always said yes to the Auburn Avenue spot. It was their place, a soul food restaurant with collard greens that required no occasion and peach cobbler that Rhea had once described, in all seriousness, as a spiritual experience. They had eaten there to celebrate, to commiserate, to decompress, to do the quiet maintenance of a friendship that had grown in the soil of shared work. They ordered their food and Rhea held her phone under the table for a moment, feeling its weight, thinking about the specific harm of telling someone the truth versus the specific harm of not telling them. There was no version where the truth was comfortable. There was only the version where the person who needed the information had it. She put her phone on the table between them, screen up, the photo already open. Andrea looked at it. She didn't pick the phone up. She just looked at it where it lay, the way you look at something when you need to see it but are not ready to hold it. Her face did not change. Or rather, it changed in a way that was barely visible and that Rhea had learned to read over 3 years. The slight settling of her jaw, the smallest tightening around her eyes, the expression of a woman receiving information she had been, on some level, already carrying. "That's the Worthington Showcase," Andrea said, finally. Her voice was even. It was so even that it hurt. 3 weeks ago. "Yes," Rhea said. "He told me it was a client event. Ran late. I shouldn't wait up. It was a client event. I don't know if she is a client." Rhea paused. "Her name is Leanna Barnes. She has 400,000 followers on Instagram. She does brand deals mostly. Lifestyle content." Another pause. "She's 29. Andrea took this in. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, Auburn Avenue moved at its ordinary Wednesday pace. Rhea watched Andrea's face with the careful attention of someone who loves a person and does not know which kind of falling they are about to witness. Then Andrea said, "Is she pretty?" Rhea understood this question. It was not about insecurity, or not only about insecurity. It was a woman trying to understand the shape of what had replaced her. "She's Instagram pretty," Rhea said carefully. "She's not you pretty." Andrea nodded. She picked up her fork. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I'm sorry," Rhea said. "Don't be. Don't ever be sorry for telling me the truth." She met Rhea's eyes for a moment, and there was something in hers that was not grief exactly, or not yet. It was the expression of a woman who has just identified a weight she has been carrying without a name and has discovered that the naming of it, though painful, is the first step toward setting it down. Pass me the hot sauce. She ate her food. She did not cry in the restaurant. She was precise about the placement of her grief. She saved it for the car, where she allowed herself 6 minutes of it, clean and real and private. And then she wiped her face with the back of her hand and started the engine and drove back to the studio because she had a Paris collection to finish and she had always done the work. That night, alone in the studio, cutting the lining for a piece she already knew was going to be extraordinary, she let herself be honest about something she had been circling for more than a year. She did not know exactly when her marriage had become a performance, when Andrew had stopped seeing her, and when she had started letting herself be unseen, treating it as weather. As a natural condition of long-term partnership rather than a slow evacuation of something that should not have been allowed to leave. She did not know the date, but she knew that the photograph on Ria's phone had not been a shock. And the absence of shock was its own kind of information. She thought, you have been grieving this for a long time. What is new is that you can finally see it clearly enough to grieve it right. She kept cutting. The fabric was exact and true under her hands. Chapter 3. Sterling. Sterling Martin did not look like the phrase tech giant had been invented to describe him, which was perhaps why the phrase kept failing to do its job when applied to him. The phrase summoned a particular image: hoodie, youth, the benign condescension of a man whose world had always cooperated with his expectations, who had learned to mistake good timing for genius. Sterling was 44, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair that had gone salt and pepper at the temples in a way that suggested this was exactly what it should do. And he moved through rooms with the deliberate quietness of someone who had learned very early that the most consequential person in any space is rarely the loudest one. He had grown up in Harlem, the younger of 2 children, the son of a postal worker and a woman who had taught 8th grade English for 31 years and expected language to be used precisely. He had been interested in systems since he was small, the way things connected and communicated, the invisible architecture of how information moved from one point to another. He had studied computer science at Howard, worked 3 years for a firm in Lower Manhattan that was intelligent enough to recognize what they had and not intelligent enough to keep it, and at 26 had built his first company in an apartment on 125th Street with 2 people he trusted and a vision that was 5 years ahead of what the market was ready for. He had waited. The market caught up. He sold the first company at 30 for a number that required a comma in a position he had not yet learned to take for granted. He built the second at 31, a supply chain intelligence platform, the kind of infrastructure that 17 million businesses used without knowing they were using it, and he did not sell that one. That one he kept because it was the thing he had been trying to build all along, and you did not sell the thing you had been trying to build all along. Martin Bridge Technologies now employed 900 people across 4 cities and was in the 3rd year of an acquisition expansion that required him to be in Atlanta for a week every quarter. He had an assistant named Cora Lee who had been with him for 11 years and who he paid with the seriousness of someone who understood that organizational excellence was not a background condition, but a human achievement. Cora was meticulous, exacting, and had opinions she delivered without softening and advice he followed more often than he admitted. On a Wednesday afternoon with 3 hours between his last meeting and a dinner he was not looking forward to, Cora sent him a message. You mentioned needing a gown for Renee's gala. This designer is worth your time. She included a link. AB Studio, Atlanta, Georgia. The website loaded cleanly, not the overproduced aesthetic of a brand trying to look expensive before it had earned the right, but something more honest. The photography was striking in its refusal to be aspirational in the conventional sense. Real women, real bodies, clothes that moved as if they had been made in conversation with the person wearing them rather than in spite of her. He read the About page, which was brief and specific and wasted nothing. He looked at the portfolio for 20 minutes, which was 19 minutes longer than he typically spent on anything that did not have a term sheet attached. He called Cora. Set up an appointment. Whatever schedule she needs. She has a wait list. About 6 weeks. I understand. Whatever she needs. He paused. How long have you had this link? A pause. 12 days. Cora. You were busy, she said, with the untroubled composure of a woman who did not apologize for having judgment. You're less busy now. He arrived at the studio at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, precisely on time, because Sterling Martin had decided at some point in his late 20s that punctuality was the simplest and most honest form of respect, and he had never found reason to revise this position. The street was quiet at that hour. He found the studio door propped open, which seemed characteristic of a place that knew it was worth finding. She met him herself. He had not expected the principal of the operation to meet him at the door, and he noticed this, filed it alongside everything else he was already noticing. The studio behind her was organized with the complex intelligence of someone who was not trying to impress anyone, the mood boards dense and specific, the bolts of fabric arranged in a logic he could not read but could tell was a logic. And he processed this plainly, the way he processed most data, a striking woman. Not in the manufactured, available way. In the complete way. The way of someone who existed in their own atmosphere. Mr. Martin, she said, and offered her hand. He shook it. Even exchange, no demonstration. Sterling, he said. Thank you for fitting me in. Your assistant is very effective, she said. She generally is. He followed her into the studio. She walked him through the collection without preamble, and he was glad of that, glad she did not perform for him, did not modulate the explanation toward what she imagined he would want to hear. She talked about the Paris collection the way people talk about things they have been thinking about for years in private and are now saying aloud, with a fluency that was not rehearsed but lived. Silhouettes and intention. The women these clothes were made for. What she was trying to say that fabric was uniquely capable of saying. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he was most disciplined about, the listening, the actual receiving of information rather than the waiting for his turn to speak. He asked 3 questions. Each one was specific in a way that demonstrated he had been paying attention, not performing attention, which was a distinction she would later tell Rhea she had noticed immediately and found remarkable in a person of his stature, where the performance of attention was usually accepted as the real thing. When she pulled the sketch for Renee's gown, he was quiet with it. A structured column in deep Bordeaux crepe with hand-cut fringe at the hem, the kind of construction that looked simple and required everything. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he said, "She's going to love this." Not, "She'll look great." Not, "Very beautiful." He said, "She's going to love this." He was thinking about his sister's feeling, not her appearance. Andrea noticed. She did not say that she noticed, but she noticed. The appointment ran 40 minutes longer than scheduled. Afterward, standing at the door while he put on his jacket, she said, "She should come in when she's ready. There's no urgency, the construction on this piece requires fittings, not deadlines." He looked at her. "That's not what most people in your position say." "I'm not making clothing for a deadline," she said. "I'm making clothing for a person." He thought about that on the way back to the hotel. He thought about it again at dinner, where the conversation was about acquisitions and equity structures, and he moved through it with his customary precision, while something else was happening in the background. A low and distinct frequency that he had learned over the years to take seriously, the sense that something worth paying attention to had just happened. Back in the studio, Rhea had arranged herself at the sample rack with an expression of intense professional focus that was doing a poor job of concealing the fact that she was watching Andrea with deep interest. "So," Rhea said. "Rhea." "I said so." "That's a word. It's a neutral word." "I know what so means when you say it." Rhea picked a piece of thread off a sleeve. He left a very significant deposit. And asked very specific questions. And was here for almost 2 hours. "He's a client," Andrea said, putting a period on the sentence and moving to the cutting table. "Absolutely," said Rhea. And turned back to the rack with the expression of a woman who had said exactly as much as she intended to. Andrea told herself Rhea was right. She told herself this while measuring the Bordeaux crepe, while pressing the seam she'd left basted, while locking up that night and driving home to the house in Sandy Springs where Andrew was again absent, again elsewhere, again on his phone when he eventually came in. She told herself that what she'd noticed about Sterling Martin was simply professionalism, simply the pleasant surprise of being listened to by a person with no obvious reason to listen carefully. Simply the way a good interaction felt when you had been living, for longer than you wanted to count, inside interactions that weren't. She was mostly convincing. Chapter 4. What Andrew Required. Andrew Brasson had been handsome at 28 in the way of men who do not yet have to work at it, and at 42 he remained presentable, which was a different and quieter thing. He was 6 feet tall, sandy-haired, from a family in Virginia that held the particular values of men who associated their self-worth with their earning, and their earning with their dominance. Not because they were cruel by nature, but because dominance was the language their fathers had spoken, and they had learned it before they were old enough to question whether it was the only available language. He had met Andrea at a pop-up market in Atlanta 11 years ago, when she was selling hand-altered vintage pieces from a folding table, and she had been, to him, a beautiful woman doing an interesting thing, and for a period of time that was enough. He had not understood, when he married her, that the interesting thing was not a hobby. He had not understood that the studio she talked about building would become a real studio, that the clients she talked about finding would become real clients, that the reputation she talked about establishing would become a real reputation that extended past the radius of his approval. He had understood these things intellectually when they happened, but something in him had not adjusted to accommodate them, and the failure to adjust had calcified over years into a posture, the posture of a man who felt, without being able to articulate it, without sounding like something he did not want to be, that his wife's success was occurring at a slight angle to his comfort. This was not simple jealousy. It was something more intricate and harder to name, the discomfort of a man who had expected to be the horizon and had found himself standing in someone else's landscape. He had managed this discomfort by managing Andrea. Not cruelly, he was not a cruel man, which made it harder to see. With the subtle tools available to people who need control, but do not want to be identified as controlling, the logistics questions that reframed her news as problems, the persistent reasonable concerns about timing and money that had her asking permission without understanding she was asking, the gradual cultural conditioning of her silence as a form of gratitude. Leanna Barnes had appeared at exactly the moment when Andrew needed to believe he was still someone's horizon. She was young and beautiful, and she laughed at the right moments, and she looked at him with the particular hunger of someone who wanted what he was offering. And he told himself this was different from Andrea in ways that it was important to feel rather than examine. He told himself that Liana saw him. What he meant was that Liana needed him, and need felt, from inside the feeling, very much like being seen. He was not thinking clearly. Men who are looking for permission rarely are. The first serious unraveling happened at Canopy, a restaurant on Peachtree that the dealership used for client lunches. Dale Nye, his regional director, held court there twice a month, long lunches with potential fleet clients or industry partners, lunches that were informal in atmosphere and deeply formal in implication. Dale had been in the luxury auto business for 30 years and had the measured effect of a man who had learned that nothing revealed character faster than how a person behaved at a table. Dale's wife Patricia had joined him that Thursday, as she sometimes did. Patricia Nye was 61, elegant in the undemonstrative way of women who do not require acknowledgement of their elegance, and she had been married to Dale long enough to know the difference between a business lunch and the performance of a business lunch. She shook Andrew's hand with warmth and settled into her chair with the ease of a woman entirely at home in any room. They were 15 minutes into their entrees when the door opened. Andrew felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air that happens when something is wrong but has not yet revealed exactly how wrong it intends to be. He looked up, and Liana was crossing the restaurant toward their table in a canary yellow wrap dress, her hair down, her body's movement carrying the particular confidence of a woman who was accustomed to being watched and wanted to be watched now. She had seen his location tagged in a mutual story that morning. She had decided to come. She had not told him she was coming. The table went through several phases. First a silence, then Andrew's attempt to manufacture a context-client relationship they'd been discussing. Then Liana sitting down without being invited and ordering a sparkling water from the server who had materialized with the professional instinct of someone trained to handle scenes with grace. Dale watched this with his characteristic stillness. Patricia Nye, who had excellent manners and a working model of every kind of social dynamics a long marriage to a public-facing man could produce, set down her fork with the quiet precision of a woman removing herself from a conversation she did not consent to. "It's lovely to meet you," Patricia said to Liana, in the tone of a woman extending courtesy precisely as far as the situation warranted and not 1 inch further. Liana looked at her with the expression of someone who had misread the room, not the specific people in it, but the category of room it was. She had a gift for certain social environments and a blind spot for others, and Dale Nye's Thursday lunch table was firmly in the blind spot. "I don't think I asked for your input, hon," Liana said. She said it sweetly. She meant it to land as confidence. It landed as something else entirely. The table went completely still. Patricia and I looked at Liana for one moment, a look that was not angry, not wounded, but that carried the specific weight of a woman who had navigated the world with grace for 60 years and was now witnessing the absence of it. And then she turned back to her food with a serenity that was more devastating than any response she could have offered. Dale looked at Andrew. The look lasted 3 seconds and contained an entire recalculation. Andrew spent the rest of that day in the cold sweat of a man who has watched something structural crack and does not yet know whether he can shore it up before the ceiling falls. The second incident arrived 12 days later, with less ambiguity and more witnesses. It was a Tuesday, 2 o'clock, the kind of afternoon in the dealership that moved at the reliable rhythm of the midweek sales staff on the floor, a fleet rep in one of the side offices, 2 showroom clients being attended to near the Bentley display. Andrew was on a call with a corporate fleet manager out of Savannah, a contract they had been cultivating for 4 months, the kind of account that required patience and the appearance of seamless professionalism. He looked up and Liana was in his doorway. She had driven from Midtown. She was dressed in the particular way she dressed when she wanted to be very visible, and she was very visible, canary, again, which was apparently the color she wore when she intended to make a point. His assistant, a professional woman named Kay who had been with the dealership for 6 years and had impeccable judgment, had tried to stop her at the reception desk. Liana had smiled at Kay and walked past her. "The MX," Liana said, in the doorway at full conversational volume. "The limit is wrong and it's been 3 days. Andrew covered the phone. "I'm on a call with a fleet account." "I've been patient," Liana said, as if he had not spoken. "I've been very patient and I need this handled." The fleet manager on the line had gone quiet in the way of someone who was listening to everything. Andrew ended the call on an excuse so thin it was nearly transparent. He stood up and managed to close the office door and managed to keep his voice low, though what he wanted to do was entirely different from what he did. He explained, again, in the same words he had used before, that certain things needed to be handled a certain way and that showing up at his workplace was not the way. Liana said that she had needs and that she had expectations and that he had made promises and that promises meant something. Andrew said that he understood, quietly, through his teeth. Liana left. 3 members of the sales staff had watched this happen from the showroom floor. Kay had written an incident note the way she had been trained to document anything unusual because Kay was excellent at her job and a small part of her. Having watched Andrea Brasson come to the dealership's holiday party 2 years running with a warmth and grace that Liana had now distinguished herself from in 30 visible minutes, had decided that documentation was appropriate. The note reached HR by Thursday. HR flagged it to Dale Nye by Friday. Dale called Andrew in the following Monday morning. The conversation was brief and shaped the way Dale Nye shaped difficult conversations, with the quiet precision of a man who had been in this industry long enough to know that the way you exit a problem matters as much as the problem itself. We value your 12 years here, Dale said. Which Andrew understood to mean, we are beginning to count the remaining ones. Andrew drove home that evening with the particular quiet of a man who has begun to understand that the things he set in motion are not going to stop moving at his request. He had been so focused on what he was gaining that he had not made a serious accounting of what he was spending. Leanna was not uncomplicated. Leanna had costs that had not been in the original calculation. Leanna was, increasingly and irrevocably, expensive. He thought about Andrea and the Paris confirmation and the way he had looked up from his phone and said, "That's good, babe." He thought about what a profoundly stupid thing that had been. Chapter 5. She Knows. Andrea filed for divorce on a Tuesday in late August, between dropping off final fabric samples for the Paris collection and a scheduled call with the Maison Bernard coordination team. She had ordered these tasks not by importance, but by what she could do on each, because the fabric samples were done and the Paris call was ready and the divorce required only the completion of a process she had been quietly preparing for 6 weeks. She had found Donna Berkeley through a recommendation from a client, a woman named Yvonne Lee, a corporate attorney who wore Andrea's pieces to trial and had once, over a fitting, said, "If you ever need family law, there is only one name." Donna Berkeley worked from an office in Midtown that smelled like fresh coffee and contained not a single unnecessary object. She was 61, black, methodical, and wore reading glasses on a chain that swung when she moved. She had reviewed everything Andrea laid on the table, the studio's formation documents, the brand's valuation projections, the Paris booking, and its associated contracts. 7 years of financial records Andrea had kept in a shared drive with the same meticulous habit she applied to everything, and had looked up from her reading glasses with the expression of a woman taking inventory. "Let me be very clear about something before we discuss strategy," Donna said. "The studio predates the marriage by 2 years. The brand is a sole proprietorship that you alone have built, funded, and operated. The Paris opportunity is a direct result of your professional reputation, which belongs to you individually. He does not have a claim to what has not been built yet, and never will while I am handling this." She looked at Andrea over her glasses. "Do you understand what I am telling you?" "I understand," Andrea said. "Good. Now, what does he have and what does he owe?" They were in that office for 2 hours. When Andrea left, she sat in her car in the parking garage and did not start the engine for 4 minutes. She was processing something that had no name exactly, not relief, not grief, but the specific vertigo of a woman who has been carrying a weight for so long that when it begins to shift, she cannot immediately tell the difference between relief and falling. She had been married for 11 years. She had been happy in the marriage at various points, with varying definition of happy. She had built her work inside the marriage, and the marriage had not celebrated the work, and she had spent years making the work smaller in the telling so that it fit inside the space the marriage was willing to allow for it. She had done this with such practiced efficiency that she had sometimes lost track of what she had edited out. Paris had made her stop editing. Paris had required her to stand in the full truth of what she had built, and in that standing she had looked around and understood that she had been making herself fit into a room that did not belong to her and had never been made with her dimensions in mind. The marriage had not made her less. She had made herself less inside it, and the distinction mattered. She started the engine. She drove to the studio. She worked until midnight, and the work was exceptional because she was not working away from something anymore. She was working toward something. The direction of the energy was different, and the fabric knew. Andrew's response to the divorce papers arrived in stages, each one revealing more of the structure beneath the presentation he had maintained for years. The first stage was shock, or the performance of shock, the expression of a man who had not expected this, which was itself a revelation about what he had been expecting. He had expected, Andrea realized later, that she would find out about Leanna and make demands within the marriage. That the discovery would be a crisis they would weather on his terms. He had not expected her to remove herself from the structure entirely, because he had not fully understood that the structure required her consent to stand. He called 4 times in the hour after his attorney called him. She let 3 go. On the 4th she answered. "You don't get to just blow this up," he said. His voice was controlled in the way of a man who is furious and has decided that control sounds better. "This is not how this works, Andrea." "Okay," she said. "We have a life. We have things built. You don't just walk away from 11 years. "I know how many years it's been," she said. "Then act like it. Act like there's something here worth preserving." He exhaled. She could hear him recalibrating, shifting to the register he used when he wanted to reach her. The softer one. "I made mistakes. I know that. But you have been putting this career above this marriage for years, and now you want to make me the only villain here." "Andrew," she said. And there was something in her voice that stopped him, a quietness that was not submission, not accommodation, but the particular stillness of a woman who has finally gotten to the bottom of something and found solid ground. "I know about Leanna." The pause lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "That's not," he started. "I know it isn't why I'm doing this," she said. "She isn't the reason. I'm telling you so you understand that I have the full picture, and I am making a clear decision with the full picture. I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I'm leaving because I have been honest with myself about what this has been." Silence. "I will have Donna's office coordinate everything that needs to be coordinated," she said. "Please work through her. I'd like us to get through this without making it worse than it has to be." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, waiting for the feeling she had been afraid of, the wave of second-guessing, the impulse to call back and reclaim the thing she'd just released. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter, the sense of a door she had been pressing against finally opening. She drove back to the studio and stayed until the lights in every building around her had gone dark. Chapter 6. What Small Things Do. Sterling called about his sister's gown in a way that was, on its face, about his sister's gown and was, beneath that face, about something he had been thinking about more than the gown. Renee would like to come in for a fitting, he said. She can be in Atlanta any weekend in the next month. She said to tell you whatever works for you and to mean it. She won't just say that and then accept an inconvenient time like she's doing you a favor by accepting it. She's specific about not doing that. Andrea was at the cutting table. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Paris confirmation, 2 weeks after she had eaten cornbread across from Rhea and looked at a photograph that had confirmed something she had already known. She had a fine-tip pen behind her ear and a half-finished toile on the dress form in front of her, and she was having, by the measure of this particular year, a fairly stable day. 2 o'clock on the 30th, she said. That gives me time to get the muslin right before the appointment. That's a Saturday. I know. She'll feel like she's inconveniencing you. Tell her she isn't. I don't offer time I'm not willing to give. She glanced at the toile. I'll need 3 measurements she can send in advance. Cora can manage that. A small pause. Then, how are you? The question had a different weight from the questions before it. Not the professional courtesy of a client checking in. Something more specific. She registered it, turned it over. I'm in the middle of something, she said. But I'm all right. Cora mentioned, and I hope this isn't intrusive, she mentioned only that you'd had a difficult few weeks. Not specifics. I wanted to say something without making it bigger than you need it to be. He paused. You don't have to be fine with me. I don't need you to perform, okay? She stopped moving the pen. Outside the studio windows, Atlanta went about its afternoon, indifferent and continuous. She thought, when did someone last say that to you? Not tell me everything, not I'm here if you need anything, the reflexive social extension that requires nothing on either end. But the specific permission to not perform okayness. When did someone say that? Thank you, she said. She meant it in the simple, complete way that real thank yous work. I'll send the fitting confirmation to Cora. The 30th, he said. And Andrea, he said her name with the careful placement of someone who is choosing to use it. You built something extraordinary. I hope you know that whatever is happening around it, the work is the work. It stands on its own. She didn't say anything for a moment. I'm learning to know it, she said. He was in Atlanta 4 weeks later for 2 days of acquisition meetings, and the morning of the first day she received a message at 8 o'clock. Good luck today on the Paris prep call. You've built this. Go in there knowing that. She read it standing at the kitchen counter in her new apartment. She had moved out of the Sandy Springs house 3 weeks prior, a decision that had been logistically complicated and emotionally clarifying, the way removing a splinter is. And she held her phone and read the message twice. Not, you can do this, which was aimed at the presence of doubt. He had written, you've built this. Past tense. Already done. He was pointing at a fact she owned. She wrote back, thank you. Call went well. He wrote, I know. She looked at that for a moment and found, to her mild alarm, that she was smiling. 2 days later a delivery arrived at the studio. It was from a restaurant on Crescent Avenue that she had been to once, 2 years ago, for a colleague's birthday, the kind of place with a reservation window of 6 weeks. The bag contained the exact meal she would have ordered. The card said, Rhea mentioned you hadn't eaten today. I thought this was rude of you and wanted to help. And below that, in smaller letters, she also mentioned you'd probably find this embarrassing. I find that endearing. Rhea held the delivery bag to her chest for a full 10 seconds before handing it over. I like him, she said, with the finality of a ruling. I pay your salary, Andrea said. You do, Rhea agreed. And yet I have opinions. Andrea ate the food at her cutting table and thought about the endearing comment and thought about a man who listened well enough to ask Rhea what she had not eaten today and thought about the specific quality of attention that required. She had been the recipient, during her marriage, of a great deal of attention that was in fact management wearing attention's clothing. She was learning the difference. The difference felt like this, a warm meal arriving when no one was expecting anything. He was in Atlanta again in October, a board meeting that kept him 2 days, and he sent her a message the evening of the first day. I have a dinner reservation I don't have a good reason to keep alone. If you're not working. She was working. She was always working. She said yes. He had found a Ghanaian restaurant in the West End that she had been going to for 4 years and had never mentioned to anyone she didn't trust with very specific things. When she walked in and recognized it, she stopped in the entry and looked at him. Cora is exceptional, he said, before she could ask. How did Cora know to look for this? She reads things, he said. Meticulously. They sat across from each other for 3 hours. The food was the way it always was, grounded, careful, the cooking of people who understood that the point of a meal was not the impression it made, but the nourishment it gave. And the conversation moved through the evening with the ease of 2 people who had figured out how to be in each other's presence without the effort of it showing. She told him about the collection. Not the summary version she gave to press contacts and buyers, but the real version, the thing she was afraid of not getting right, the piece she had built and rebuilt 4 times because it wasn't true yet. The specific and private ambition she had for what the collection was supposed to say. He received all of it without making her feel like she was oversharing. He asked questions. He asked good questions, the kind that took what she had said and pushed gently on the edge of it, the way you press a seam to see if the stitch holds. He told her about his sister Renee, who was a pediatric surgeon and had a laugh like something breaking and was the most terrifying card player Sterling had ever encountered. He talked about building his second company during the 18 months after his first marriage ended, how the work had been simultaneously the healthiest and most avoidant thing he'd done, and how he had eventually learned the difference between building something and hiding inside it. He said this without apology and without the careful editing of someone managing the listener's perception. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. What ended the marriage? She asked. She had not planned to ask. It emerged from the ease of the evening, from the sense that honest questions were welcome here. He considered it. We wanted the same things in theory, he said, and wanted different things in practice. She wanted me to be less of who I was, and I wanted her to be more of who she was, and we were both asking each other to do something the other person couldn't do without losing something essential. He was quiet for a moment. There was no villain. That was almost harder. When the story is clear, it's easier to understand. Our story just ran out. She thought about that. She thought about her own story with Andrew, which had a villain in the conventional sense, or at least an antagonist, and whether the villain-shaped version was easier or harder than a story that simply ran out. She thought it might not matter. Both versions required the same next thing, the willingness to start a different story. I'm not ready for anything, she said. She said it directly, without softening it, because he had been direct with her, and she understood this was the language available to them. I'm in the middle of a divorce that isn't finished. I'm 6 weeks from Paris. I have a lot of things that need to be attended to before I can. I know, he said. He said it simply, without deflation or impatience, the way you say a thing you have already accepted. I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm not in a hurry. He picked up his water glass. I just didn't want you to wonder where I stood. Wondering wastes time, and I don't like to waste things. She looked at him across the table. The restaurant was warm and moving gently with the sound of other people's evenings. I appreciate that, she said. You don't have to say anything back, he said. I'm not, she said. I'm just deciding how I feel about being understood by someone who isn't trying to manage me. He smiled. Not the practiced smile of a man who knew his smile was an asset. The real one, which was quieter and arrived later, and was worth considerably more. Driving home, she did something she had not done in longer than she could easily account for. She let herself feel the possibility of a thing without immediately cataloging its risks. She let it sit in her chest, unexamined, warm and inconclusive, and she thought, all right. All right. Chapter 7. The Shape of Andrew's Desperation. Andrew Brosson had imagined that the separation would clarify things. This was not a generous imagining. He was not thinking about Andrea's clarity, not at first. He was thinking about his own. He had imagined that once the drama of discovery settled, once Leanna's novelty found its natural equilibrium with its cost, once Andrea had space to remember what she had and what she would be without it, the situation would resolve itself into something he could manage. This was not what happened. What happened was that Andrea moved into an apartment in Inman Park that she had apparently been researching before he knew anything was being researched, and the apartment was full of her own choices, her own light, her own colors, her own things arranged with the logic of a woman who was learning what her life looked like when she was the only person deciding. She told him through Donna Berkeley's office. She did not ask his opinion. She did not tell him the address. The studio continued. This was what he had not fully reckoned with. The studio did not require him. The collection for Paris continued without reference to his approval, his schedule, his concerns about the cost of international shipping or the wisdom of her price point. Client appointments filled the calendar. Rhea Jordan continued operating the intake and logistics with her characteristic competence. The brand moved forward on the engine Andrea had built, and his absence from the maintenance of that engine was irrelevant because he had never been part of the maintenance. He had been part of the scenery of the life surrounding it. He had not understood this about himself until the scenery was no longer required. The texts began in September and changed register by degrees, the way a person's true feelings become visible when the performance they require becomes too expensive to maintain. First, I think we need to talk. Then, you owe me a real conversation. Then, I made mistakes and I know that, but you are not being fair. Then, I have given 12 years to this family and you are acting like I'm nothing. The family framing. She had noticed how it appeared when he felt cornered, the upgrade of his personal complaint into a collective noun, as if the marriage were a shared institution rather than a structure she had poured herself into while he rearranged the furniture. She read the texts and did not respond. She forwarded the escalating ones to Donna Berkeley, who acknowledged receipt and said, "Keep everything." Then, "You think this Sterling Martin is something? You don't know what you're walking toward. You know what you had." She stopped when she read this one. Not because it frightened her, it didn't, quite, not yet, but because of what it revealed. He had done enough looking to find the name. He had constructed enough of a theory to feel threatened by it. He was watching, which was different from caring, and the difference mattered. She called Sterling that night, not from need but from the decision she had made to stop isolating the difficult things. She had spent 11 years managing her interior alone, maintaining the polished surface that Andrew's world required, and she had decided that the new version of herself, the one being assembled in the apartment in Inman Park, the one going to Paris, did not operate that way. Sterling answered on the second ring. She heard the quality of a hotel room in the background, the particular quiet of an anonymous space. He's been texting, she said. The last one mentioned your name. Do you feel safe? Not, what did he say? Not, what should I do? Do you feel safe? The question was placed precisely at the center of what mattered. Yes. He's not. Andrew isn't violent. He's frightened. He thought the marriage was a thing he could wait out, and he's realizing it isn't. Frightened men are sometimes more dangerous than angry ones, Sterling said quietly. Not always. But sometimes. Your attorney has the texts. She has everything. Good. A pause. She heard him shift. I want you to know I'm here. I'm not going to insert myself into what belongs between you and your lawyer and your process. That's yours to move through. But if you need anything in any category, you have me. The not inserting yourself is you being here, she said. That's the whole thing. Knowing when to be present and knowing when presence means staying back. She paused. Andrew never understood that. He thought being present meant being in charge of the room. Presence is attention, Sterling said. It's not occupation. She sat with that for a moment. Presence is attention. She was going to think about that for a long time. Andrew came to the studio on a Wednesday in October, 10 days before Paris. He had not called ahead. Rhea was alone at the reception desk when he walked in, and she stood with a smoothness that was entirely composed of obstruction, wearing a professional face. She's with a client, Rhea said, warmly, with all of her teeth. I'll wait. She has 3 more appointments after this one. You'd be looking at 6, maybe 6:30. Rhea's expression did not move. But if you'd like, I can leave a note for Donna Berkeley's office to reach you about scheduling something more formal. He looked past her into the studio the way some men do, not reading the space for what it was, but looking for the person in it as if the person were an object he had mislaid. Andrea, he said, at a volume that reached the fitting room. She appeared at the fitting room door herself because she had heard and had decided, in the 2 seconds between hearing him and appearing, that this was her studio and she would meet what came into it directly rather than hide behind Rhea's very capable obstruction. She looked at him. She had not seen him in 6 weeks. He looked like a man who had been running on a story about himself and was beginning to feel the story strain. Andrew, she said. Her voice was level. Her hands were still. This is not the right way. Please work through Donna's office. She looked at him for one moment longer, long enough to let him see that she was not angry, was not wavering, was simply clear, and then she turned back to her client. He stood there for a moment. Then he left. He sat in his car across the street for 37 minutes. Rhea logged this on her phone, noted the license plate for the record that already existed, and sent the log to Donna Berkeley before she'd gotten back inside the studio door. Inside, her client, a woman named Simone Bernard, a television producer who had commissioned a piece for an industry event, was standing on the fitting platform in the bodice Andrea had been adjusting when Andrew arrived. Simone was watching Andrea return to her with the expression of a woman who had seen enough of the world to understand what she had just witnessed. You all right? Simone asked. I'm good, Andrea said. She picked up the pincushion. She looked at the bodice. She saw exactly what needed to happen to it. Let me show you what I'm doing with this side seam. She worked for 4 more hours after Simone left. She was not using the work to avoid anything. She was using the work to be inside the thing that had always been true about her, the thing that predated Andrew and would outlast the divorce and had carried her through both, the capacity to see clearly and to make something from what she saw. She worked until the fitting room light was the only light on the block, and when she locked up she stood for a moment on the sidewalk and looked at the studio from the outside and thought, yours. This is yours. You built this. She walked to her car. She drove to her apartment. She cooked something small and ate it at a table she had picked out herself, and she felt, in the quiet of her own choosing, like a woman who was taking up exactly the right amount of space. Chapter 8. What Silk Keeps. Paris was in 9 days. The collection was done, everything constructed, pressed, tagged, and documented with the care of someone who had built it, understanding that the ocean between Atlanta and Paris was a very real distance, and that every piece needed to be exactly right before it went into the garment bags that were lined up against the studio wall like a small standing army. Rhea had made the shipping arrangements, the model fittings in Paris, the coordination with Maison Bernard's team, the press kit translations, and a 12-page logistics document that she had printed, color-coded, and laminated in a way that Andrea found genuinely excessive and deeply comforting. The studio had a stillness in the week before a major submission that Andrea recognized and relied on, the quiet of finished work, the held breath before the thing goes out into the world and becomes something other than private. Sterling came to Atlanta on a Friday. He had a reason, a short partner meeting, a Saturday call he could take from anywhere, but she understood that the reason was adjacent to the real reason, which was that she was 9 days from Paris and he wanted to be in the same city. She understood this without it being said and found that she did not mind the understanding. He texted, I'm here until Sunday. No agenda. If you'd like company tonight, I'd like to provide it. She had been standing in the studio when she read this, looking at the garment bags. The collection was done. The work that had been available to occupy the whole of her attention had, for now, been completed. For the first time in months there was no immediate task to move toward. She wrote, "Come to mine. I'll cook." The "I'll cook" was a surprise to her as she sent it. She had not cooked for anyone in a long time. Cooking required wanting to, and for a long period she had cooked from obligation, the reflexive domestic production of a woman who had understood, without it ever being stated, that this was part of what was expected of the space she occupied. Cooking for Sterling tonight was different. She wanted to. The distinction was not small. He arrived on time, which she had stopped being surprised by, but had not stopped noting, because his punctuality was not the anxious kind that people perform when they want to impress. It was the settled kind, the habit of a person who values other people's time because he understands its cost. He brought a bottle of wine that she would not have chosen. She told him this, and he said, "I know, that's why I brought it." She opened it and tried it, and it was exactly right in a way she could not entirely explain, and she filed this alongside the Ghanaian restaurant and the delivery from Crescent Avenue. He paid attention. He paid the particular kind of attention that people pay when they are thinking about you specifically rather than thinking about the impression they're making on you. She made a Moroccan chicken with olives and preserved lemon, a recipe she had learned from a woman at a fabric market in Decatur who had written it for her on the back of a receipt. It was not simple, but it was not showy, which described most of the things she cared about. They ate at the kitchen table and the conversation moved the way it had moved at the Ghanaian restaurant, easily, without effort. One thing opening into another the way good conversations do when both people are genuinely present. He talked about Renee and the gown fitting, which had been, by his account, the most expressive he had seen his sister in years. Renee, who was disciplined and precise and not given to visible emotion, had stood in the fitting room in the Bordeaux crepe and looked at herself in the mirror with the stunned gratitude of someone who had been given back something they hadn't known they were missing. "She said you made it for her," Sterling said. "Not for a version of her. For her exactly." Andrea thought about that. About how that was what she had been trying to do her whole career, and how hearing it back from the person who had received it made it feel complete in a specific and important way. "That's what clothes should do," she said. "They should say, 'I see you. Here. This is yours.'" Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's what you do," he said. "Not just with the clothes." She looked up. "You see people," he said. "You see them and you tell the truth about what you see. That's not as common as it should be." She looked at him across the table with the expression of a woman who has been given accurate information and is trying to decide whether she is ready to accept it. She was learning that his accuracy was consistent, that he did not say things to produce effects, that when he said something it was the thing he meant, and that this made the things he said consequential in a way she had stopped expecting language to be. After dinner, they moved to the living room floor because the living room floor was where she did her best thinking, sitting with her back against the couch and her legs stretched out, and she had spread the Paris collection photographs across the coffee table, the full set. In sequence, the story the clothes told when they walked together. She talked him through each one, what she'd intended, where the construction had surprised her, the piece that had given her the most trouble and had become, in the end, the truest. He sat beside her with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, looking at the photographs with the specific attention of someone who is learning a language. He asked, "What does this seam do?" He asked, "Why this color here and not the one you had in the sketch?" He asked questions that were about the work and not about the impression of understanding the work, and she answered all of them with the full density of what she knew. At some point the evening deepened without announcement. The photographs were still on the table, but the talking had become something slower, pauses that were comfortable rather than awkward, the natural silence of two people who no longer needed to fill the space between them with proof that the space was worthwhile. She thought, "This is what ease feels like. You have not felt this in a long time. Let yourself feel it." "Stay," she said, and heard herself say it, and did not pull it back. "I mean here. Tonight." "I'm not," she stopped. She was not afraid exactly. She was navigating the distance between what she wanted and the 11 years of muscle memory that had trained her to want carefully, in proportion to what was expected. "I know what you mean," he said. He turned toward her. "Is that what you want?" "Yes," she said. The certainty of it surprised her. Not the wanting, the clarity of the wanting. She had wanted things quietly for a long time. This felt different. This felt true in the way that only things said without editing feel true. He reached across and moved one of the photographs from where it was about to be displaced, setting it carefully on the table with the automatic gesture of someone who treats what matters to the person he is with as something that matters to him. That gesture, small, unhurried, unremarkable, was what finally let go of the last careful distance she had been maintaining. She had told him once, in the restaurant, that she had spent so many years inside a version of herself that had learned to be quiet, to edit, to take up the precise amount of space that was permitted, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be met at full size. She had said it lightly, as an observation, and he had heard it as the significant thing it was, and had filed it with the same care he filed everything she said. He had remembered. In the warm quiet of that Friday night, with the Atlanta skyline doing its slow diminishing beyond her windows and a length of raw teal silk, fabric she had brought from the studio to study in evening light, because she always brought something home. Draped across the back of the armchair, he turned toward her completely and held both her hands in both of his. He did not rush toward anything. He was, as she had come to understand, was simply who he was, entirely present in the moment that existed rather than already moving toward the next one. Tell me what you want, he said. His voice was low and even. I want to hear you say it out loud. She understood that this was not a performance. He was not playing a role. He was asking because he believed, genuinely and without equivocation, that what she wanted was the thing that mattered most in this room, and that she was entitled to name it, and that the naming of it was something she deserved to practice. She looked at him. She thought about all the years of editing. She thought about all the times she had made her wanting smaller so that it fit inside someone else's tolerance for it. I want to be seen, she said. Not managed. Not contained. I want someone to look at all of it, all of me, and not look away. She breathed. I've been invisible inside the thing that was supposed to see me. I don't want that anymore. I need to know what the other thing feels like. Then that is exactly what this is, he said. No flourish. No performance. A man saying the exact true thing. He lifted her wrist slowly, and she understood what he was asking before the question formed completely, and she answered it with her stillness, the yes that doesn't require words, because the body already knows and has chosen. He reached for the silk from the armchair. Dark teal, heavy and raw, the kind that held its shape. He moved without urgency. Every action preceded by his eyes finding her face, reading her, making sure. He tied the silk around her wrists with the deliberate care of a person constructing something important, not to confine but to define. To say, you are here. This space is yours. Nothing is required of you in it except exactly this. The silk was cool and then warm, and the warmth was the warmth of being held. Look at me, he said. She did. Right here, he said. Stay right here with me. She stayed. What followed was slow in the way that things are slow when time is not the point. He spoke throughout, not commandingly, not theatrically, but in the low and continuous way of a man who understood that being seen required being told what was being seen. He described her. Not her appearance, not the surface of her, but the weight and truth of her, the way she received things, the way she breathed, the particular courage of a woman who had decided to be present in her own life. He said her name the way names are meant to be said, specifically, as if it belonged to one person and he was addressing that person directly. She thought, at some point in the soft middle of it, this is what I was afraid of. Not the vulnerability. The arrival. The landing in a place that turns out to be real. He asked, throughout, in small ways that required no explicit asking, the pause that was a question, the attention that waited for her answer. She answered. Out loud, which was new. She had learned, in the years of her marriage, to keep her interior very private, to need quietly and receive without comment, to manage her own experience so that it did not demand accommodation. She did not do that now. She said what she felt. She said what she wanted. She stayed in the room. He was in no hurry. This was not restraint. Restraint implies effort against desire, and this was not that. This was a man who moved slowly because he understood that arrival was the point, and the point deserved time. When she was close, he said, I have you. Simply, directly. Not boasting. Confirming. She believed him. Afterward, in the deep quiet, he freed her wrists and held her hands and was simply there with her, which was the most complete thing. She lay beside him and let the particular silence of a true thing be what it was. She did not manage it. She did not reduce it to something easier. She thought, there it is. That is what you were looking for. That is what you were owed all along. She let herself have it. Chapter 9, Paris. She flew out on a Monday morning, first light. Rhea beside her in the adjacent seat with her laptop already open and a typed logistics document on her screen that covered in its organized density every contingency Rhea had been able to imagine in the 2 months she had been imagining contingencies. She had a printed copy as well, laminated, because Rhea had decided at some point that the lamination made her feel better, and Andrea had long ago learned that the things that made Rhea Jordan feel operationally secure were worth enabling without comment. Runway order, Rhea said, at 30,000 feet, over the Atlantic. I know the runway order. Walk me through it. Rhea. Humor me. She walked her through it. 12 pieces. The opening look was the Celadon structured coat, big, clear, a statement of jurisdiction before the conversation began. Then the amber bias cut column. Then the midnight plum 2-piece with the architectural shoulder. Then the pieces that told the middle of the story, the progression she had been building all year, the movement from structure to softness that was the collection's actual argument, that full women, real women, women who had survived and decided and arrived at themselves, deserved clothing that told the truth about them. The closing piece was the Bordeaux column, the twin of Renee's gown. It would walk last because it was the answer to everything that came before it. She had been awake at 4 in the morning building this walk in her head, and now she said it aloud over the Atlantic, and it was exactly right. Somewhere near sunrise her phone buzzed with a message. Good luck today. You built this. Go show them who you are. She held her phone and read it twice. She typed back, thank you for being here even when you're not here. He wrote, I'll be watching every second. Go. She put her phone in her bag. She looked out the window at the lightning sky over water and let herself feel the full size of it, not just the collection, not just the invitation, but the distance traveled. Not geography. Distance traveled inside herself, through 11 years of shrinking and 6 months of expanding and one long Friday night in Atlanta in which she had finally, fully arrived at the dimensions she was always supposed to have. She was going to Paris. She had made the things that would walk the room. She had made them in the year she had finally stopped apologizing, and they carried that in every scene. Maison Bernard's showroom was on the 4th floor of a building in the Marais that smelled like cedar and old money and the particular electricity of a room full of people who knew they were in the business of deciding what would matter. The coordination team was precise and warm, a woman named Isabel, who ran the floor with an efficiency Andrea recognized and respected, and a junior associate named Mark who had apparently read everything available on Andrea's work and was trying very hard not to say this. The models were her fittings from the Paris agency she'd been working with for 6 weeks. They ranged in size and shape in a way she had specified deliberately, because the collection was an argument and the argument required its full range. The room filled in the 30 minutes before the show. She watched it from behind the screen partition that separated the dressing area from the viewing space. Buyers from Milan, Paris, London. A stylist whose client list she knew by heart. A journalist from a publication that had not previously covered her work. A fashion director from a department store whose Atlanta floor she had been in conversations with for 2 years. Ria, standing at the back wall with the laminated logistics document folded under her arm and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this moment and intended to remember every second of it. The music began. Isabel gave her the nod. The first model walked. The celadone coat moved the way Andrea had needed it to move, with the confidence of something that knew it was the opening line of a statement worth paying attention to. She watched from her position behind the partition, her hands still at her sides, her breath steady, receiving what was happening with the full attention of someone who has given everything to a thing and now must let it exist without her. The room's quality of attention changed by the third look. She felt it before she could see it, the slight shift in the air of a group of people who have stopped performing their presence and begun to actually inhabit it. By the 6th look, the amber bias cut, the woman from the Milan buying office had turned to say something to her colleague. By the 10th, the stylist Andrea had been watching since the room filled was holding her phone in a way that suggested she was taking notes rather than recording, which meant she was thinking about specific clients. Then the Bordeaux column. The model who wore it was a woman in her 40s, which Andrea had specified when she booked the casting because the collection was not interested in youth as its primary credential. She walked with the unhurried exactness of someone who understood the assignment completely. She was the answer. She was everything that had come before, resolved. The fringe at the hem caught the light and moved. The Bordeaux was exactly right. The construction held. The model reached the end of the runway and paused, and in that pause the room was completely silent in the way that rooms are silent not from absence, but from saturation, from a group of people holding something collectively that none of them wanted to interrupt. Then the applause. Ria cried. She did this in the bathroom at the end of the hall immediately after the last model cleared the runway, as she had told herself she absolutely would not do because she was a professional in a professional space. She was in there for 3 minutes and came out composed and cleared her throat and said to Andrea, with complete composure, "The stylist wants a card. And the Milan buyer wants to talk tonight." "Tonight," Andrea said. Her voice was steady. She was standing in the empty runway space with the Maison Bernard staff moving around her, collecting programs, resetting chairs, all the business of aftermath, and she was looking at the space where the clothes had just been. She thought, "You made those. Out of a studio in Atlanta with your hands and your vision and 12 years of insisting that the vision was real. You made those and they just walked Paris Fashion Week and the room was silent the right way." She thought, "No one gave you this. You built it." She thought, "You were always this. It was always here. No one made it possible. It was always already possible." Ria put her hand briefly on Andrea's shoulder, the two of them standing together in the emptied room, and Andrea covered Ria's hand with her own for a moment in the way that says everything without requiring words. Then she straightened. She had a Milan buyer to meet. Chapter 10. What Andrew Lost. The end of Andrew Brayson's time at the dealership was not a single event. It was a sequence, each item in the sequence having been set in motion by a choice he had made when he thought the choices were only about what he was gaining. After the canopy incident, Dale Nice's posture toward him had shifted in the precise and barely visible way that powerful men shift when they have made a private decision and are waiting for the appropriate moment to act on it. Dale was not impetuous. Dale had been in this industry for 30 years and had overseen 11 personnel separations in that time and understood that how you managed exits mattered as much as the fact of them. He watched Andrew for 6 weeks after the restaurant. He watched how Andrew managed the floor, how he presented to clients, how he spoke in meetings. He was looking for the pattern the incident had revealed and seeing, now, what he had perhaps not been looking for before. The dealership appearance, Leanna arriving in the showroom, the raised voices, the fleet call that had ended on a pretext, had settled things for Dale. Not because of the personal embarrassment of it, though that was real. Because of what it indicated about Andrew's judgment, his boundary management, his capacity to separate the various theaters of his life in a way that protected the business. A man who could not manage that separation was a man whose complications would continue to arrive at work. Dale called Andrew in on a Monday morning and had a conversation that was brief and professional and kind in the way of men who have made decisions they intend to hold. He used the language of mutual agreement. He spoke about Andrew's 12 years with respect. He made clear that there was a package being assembled by HR. He did not leave room for negotiation, because the negotiation had already been completed in his own mind and revisiting it would serve no one. Andrew left the building with his personal items in a box on a Thursday afternoon in November. His assistant Kay walked him out with the discretion of a person who respected the privacy of exits, and she was professional and warm and shook his hand at the door, and what she did not say, because she was too good at her job to say it, was that she had understood for 2 years that the woman who came to the holiday parties with warmth and genuine interest in the people she met was too good for this particular situation, and she hoped that woman was, somewhere, okay. Leanna Barnes posted a photo from a restaurant Andrew could no longer afford 11 days after he cleared out his office. She was at a table with a man whose watch cost more than Andrew's monthly car payment, and she was laughing, and the caption was a single sunflower emoji, and the comment section called it a glow-up. And Andrew was among the people who looked at the post in the way you look at something you need to stop looking at and cannot stop looking at. She had not returned his last 4 messages. He had spent $11,000 on the Amex in 6 weeks, and the return on that expenditure was the understanding, too late and at full cost, that he had not been investing in a relationship. He had been purchasing an experience that had no interest in him specifically, only in what he specifically had been able to provide. When the provision ended, so did the experience, cleanly and without sentiment. And he was left alone in the Sandy Springs house with the expensive countertops and the painting he had chosen, and a marriage he had destroyed for a woman who had moved to a table with a nicer watch before the ink on the separation agreement was fully dry. He was not entirely without self-awareness. Alone in the evenings, in rooms he had chosen to demonstrate something about himself to a wife who had finally and correctly stopped living in them, he understood some portion of what he had done and what it had cost and what kind of man had made those choices. The understanding did not come all at once. It came in pieces, in the dark, in the specific and terrible quiet of a house that had been designed to impress rather than inhabit. He called Andrea twice more in November. Both calls went to voicemail. The voicemails were not angry. They were the voicemails of a man who had stopped being angry because anger had not produced the result he needed it to produce, and who had arrived at something older and harder, the genuine, belated understanding of what he'd had and the irreversible knowledge that he had traded it for something that was never going to hold his weight. Donna Berkeley's office received the calls as information. The divorce finalized in December. It was clean and swift and favored Andrea on every point that mattered, which was all of them. And Andrew signed the papers in Donna Berkeley's conference room with the expression of a man completing a transaction that had become inevitable and who had enough self-knowledge left to know that fighting it would cost more than he had left to spend. He signed. He left. That was the end of Andrew Brayson's presence in the story of Andrea Brayson's life, though not, of course, the end of Andrew Brasson. He went on, in the way that people go on, looking for work in his industry in a market that was narrower than he had accounted for, in a city that was smaller than his network had felt when his network was intact. He would find his way to some version of what came next. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had allowed himself to become bad at the particular work of seeing another person clearly, and that failure had been total and consequential, and it was his to carry. Andrea sent no final message. There was nothing left that required saying. Chapter 11. The Long Way Home. December in Atlanta was mild and gray and moved at the particular pace of a city transitioning from one version of itself to another, which suited Andrea. She was in transition herself, not in the anxious sense, not the transition of a person who has been displaced and is searching for stable ground. The transition of a person who has found the ground and is now learning what it feels like to stand on it without accommodating someone else's preference for where you stood. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday. She found out via a message from Donna Berkeley that was brief and complete. It's done. Congratulations. Donna did not add anything further, because Donna Berkeley understood that congratulations was the exact right word and that the exact right word did not require embellishment. Andrea was in the studio when she received it. She read it once. She set the phone down on the cutting table. She stood for a moment in the studio she had built, the brick walls, the mood boards, the bolts of fabric in their particular order, the dress form that had held 37 garments this year alone, the framed photograph on the east wall that Rhea had printed and mounted without telling her, the Paris runway, the Bordeaux column, the model at the end of the runway in the held moment before the applause. She stood in all of it and let herself understand that it was all hers, completely and without condition. Then she called Rhea. It's done, she said. A pause. Then Rhea, with the precision and warmth of someone who had been present for the whole of this and understood every layer of what it meant. Good. Are you okay? I'm good, Andrea said. And meant it, not in the polished, managed way she had meant it for so many years. In the true way. Then we celebrate, Rhea said. The Auburn Avenue spot. Tonight. And you are not allowed to bring work. I'll bring one sketch, Andrea said. The sketch stays in the car. Rhea. It stays in the car, Rhea said, with the pleasant finality of a woman who had long ago decided she was allowed to have the last word on certain things. I'll see you at 7. She went to dinner. She did not bring the sketch. She ate collard greens and drank wine and sat across from the person who had been with her through the full arc of this year, who had found the photograph, who had stood in the studio doorway with a warmth made of obstruction. Who had logged the car outside the studio and sent the records to Donna Berkeley, who had cried in a Paris bathroom and emerged composed, who had said I like him with the weight of a verdict, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was sitting exactly where she was supposed to be. Sterling came to Atlanta for the new year. He had asked, 2 weeks before, whether she had plans, and she had said no, and he had said, then I'd like to be there if you'll have me. Not, can I come? Not, I'm coming. I'd like to be there if you'll have me. She had decided she would have him. They did not go out. This was a deliberate choice by both of them, arrived at without much discussion, an agreement reached in the shorthand that had developed between them over months of consistent attention. The city's parties and restaurants and rooftop countdowns were available to them. They were also not the point. She bought the groceries. He arrived in the afternoon with wine and something in a paper bag he had gotten from a bakery he'd found 3 blocks from her apartment, pastries for the morning, the kind of thing you think to bring for someone when you are thinking about tomorrow as well as today. They cooked together. He was a competent cook in the way of someone who is self-sufficient and has never made a performance of it, and he moved around her kitchen with the attentiveness of a guest who is paying attention to how the kitchen worked rather than treating it as a stage. She noticed this. She noticed all of it, still, the way she had been noticing since the first appointment in the studio. She suspected she would continue noticing for a long time. She had decided this was not a deficiency in trust. It was a practice of presence, a choice to be conscious of what was happening rather than taking it for granted. She intended to keep making it. They ate at 10, later than planned, because the cooking had turned into conversation that neither of them wanted to interrupt, and the meal was good in the way that a meal is good when no one is performing it. They watched the city from her window as midnight came. The Atlanta skyline did its particular thing, the Ferris wheel at Centennial, the tower lights, the sound of other people's celebrations moving through the glass as a soft, distant music. She stood beside him at the window, and he stood beside her, and they were both quiet in the easy way, the way that does not require filling. 12 minutes into the new year, he turned toward her and said, I'm in this. Fully. I want you to know that clearly, and I want you to know it before we're another few months in, and the not saying starts to create a weight. I'm not interested in ambiguity with you. She looked at him. I know, she said. Is that? I know, she said again, and there was warmth in it. I know you're in it. I've known for a while. That's not the question. She turned back to the window for a moment. The question is me. Whether I've gotten enough of myself back to give you something real. She turned back to him. I'm close. Tell me when, he said. Not impatiently. With the patience of a man who understood that the timeline was hers and that this was correct. Give me until February, she said. He nodded. The nod was simple. It was the nod of a man who had said what he meant and was content to let the other person take the time they needed, because he was confident enough in what was real that he did not need to accelerate it. They stayed at the window until the city quieted. Then they moved to the couch, and he told her about Renee's last visit, and she told him about a new client who had come in after Paris with a project that was ambitious in the most interesting way. And the conversation ran until 2 in the morning when she fell asleep mid-sentence, which she was briefly embarrassed about, and he was charmed by, and she was not allowed to apologize for. She woke in the morning to coffee already made and the pastries from the bakery on the counter and a note that said, back by noon. The good window light is yours. She took her coffee to the chair by the window and sat in the morning light and drew in her sketchbook for an hour without an agenda, just the pure and private pleasure of making marks that didn't owe anything to anyone, and she felt, in that ordinary morning with its ordinary light and its coffee and its sense of a person who had been here and would be back, like the full and complete version of herself. Not the managed version. Not the version that had learned to want quietly. The whole one. This, she thought. This is what you were building toward. Not Paris. Not the brand. This. The right to take up space inside your own life. Epilogue, February. She told him yes in February, as promised. She told him in the studio, which was the place that had always told the truth about her, the right room for telling true things. It was the 14th, which she had not planned. She had not planned the day, had not chosen it for its symbolism, but had arrived at it because it was a Saturday, and she was in the studio doing what she did on Saturdays, the quiet, private work of a new collection beginning to take shape on the mood boards, when he had come by with coffee and the ease of a person who had learned where she was on Saturday mornings, and had not needed to announce himself. She had been standing at the board when he came through the door, coffee in both hands, jacket open, the February morning gray and clear behind him, and she had looked at him and understood. With the particular completeness of a thing that has been true for a long time and is finally being formally acknowledged, that she was ready. Not the absence of fear ready. The other kind. The kind that comes from knowing yourself well enough to know what you are choosing and why, and to choose it without apology. I'm in this, she said. Fully. He set down the coffees on the table beside the pincushion. He came and stood before her with the seriousness of a man receiving something significant and intending to receive it with the gravity it deserved. Yeah, he said. I know who I am now, she said. I know what I'm worth and I know what I require and I know what I'm capable of giving that is genuinely mine to give, not just the leftovers of a woman who used to give it all away to the wrong place. She looked at him steadily. I want to give it to the right place. I think you might be the right place. I think I am, he said. Without arrogance. With the simple, grounded confidence of a man who had been paying attention for months and had reached a well-evidenced conclusion. She smiled. The full one, the one that had been present less frequently in the years of her marriage and had been returning over these months of reclamation, the one that meant, I am here. I am exactly here. The coffee's getting cold, she said. He laughed. He handed her the cup. The spring collection was the best thing she had ever made. This was the consensus of the buyers who previewed it in March, the journalists who described it in the language their industry used for things that mattered, the woman who wore the opening piece to a gala in New York and was photographed in it in a way that moved through the culture as images move when they have captured something true. But it was also Andrea's own assessment, the private one, arrived at in the studio on a Tuesday night when she was alone with the finished collection and her own honest eyes. She looked at what she had made and she thought, you made this in the year you stopped shrinking. That's what they're wearing. That's what all of it has always been. The clothes are the record of who is making them. These clothes are the record of a woman who decided to take up space and stayed decided. She thought about the woman on the mood board she had found 3 years ago in a magazine and never thrown away, not famous, not a model, just a woman in a street photograph in some city Andrea didn't recognize. Standing on a corner in a coat that was exactly right, looking directly at the camera with an expression that did not ask anything of the person behind it. That expression had been the collection's North Star for years. Not the coat. The expression. The claim of full presence. The refusal to apologize for being there. She had made that expression into clothing. She had made herself into that expression. Rhea Jordan was promoted to creative director in March, with a salary that made her sit very still for a moment before she said anything and then say, I have opinions about the new season's color palette. Andrea had said, I know you do. That's why you're the creative director. Donna Berkeley sent a note after the divorce finalized, not a formal one, a personal one, handwritten on paper with her name on it, that said, every woman I represent should come through this the way you did. Well done. Andrea had framed it. It was on the east wall of the studio beside the Paris photograph. Sterling flew to Atlanta every third week through the spring, and she flew to New York twice in March and once in April. They did not rush anything. They were, by nature and by the specific wisdom they had both accumulated through previous lives, people who understood the value of deliberateness. They had dinners that became whole evenings. They had mornings that became whole days. They fought once in April, a real disagreement, sharp and uncomfortable, about something that mattered to both of them and that required an actual resolution rather than management or avoidance, and they resolved it honestly. And what they had after the resolution was something stronger than what they'd had before, because it had been tested and had held. They had both needed to know it could hold. Now they knew. She met Renee in New York in May, at a dinner in Harlem at a restaurant where Sterling had grown up eating with his family and considered sacred. Renee was exactly as described, a precise, direct woman with a surgeon's relationship to wasted words and a laugh that arrived suddenly and completely and transformed her face. She looked at Andrea across the table with the assessing attention of someone who had been watching out for her brother for a long time and had been waiting to form her own opinion of the person who now mattered to him. At the end of the evening, in the brief overlap between Sterling going to get the car and Renee and Andrea standing on the sidewalk together, Renee said, he's been different this year. Andrea looked at her. Not different changed, Renee said. Different landed. Like he found the thing he was building toward. She looked at Andrea with the directness of a woman who spoke precisely. That's you, by the way. You're what he was building toward. I thought you should know that. Andrea stood on the Harlem sidewalk in the warm May night and thought about that. About the idea of being a destination. About what it meant to be the right place for someone, not a refuge from themselves, but a complement to themselves, a person who made you more of who you already were rather than less. He's what I was building toward too, she said. I just didn't know what it looked like yet. Renee nodded. Once, with the satisfaction of a verdict she had already reached being confirmed, and then the car appeared at the curb and they got in and the evening continued and was good all the way to the end. The AB Studio Fall Collection debuted in September, 1 year after Paris. The theme, if it could be called that, she preferred to call it the question the clothes were asking, was inheritance. What we carry. What we choose to carry. What we set down and what we pick back up once we know our own strength. The opening look was the color of the walls in her studio, the deep warm white she had chosen herself, years ago, when the walls were still someone else's beige. She watched the first model walk and felt, as she always felt in the moment of the work going out into the world, the clean separation of it. She had made the thing and now the thing belonged to whoever received it. That was the deal with making. You put the truth in, and then you let it go and you trust that the truth will find its people. Hers had found them. After the show, in the green room, in the 20 minutes before the reception, she stood alone with the rack of garments and let herself have the full quiet of it. She had built this. She had built it across a decade, through a marriage that had asked her to make it smaller, through a divorce that had asked her to reclaim it fully, through a year of reconstruction and one night in Atlanta with a length of teal silk and a man who had told her she was seen. And through Paris and February and a spring and summer of being, steadily and without apology, exactly who she was. She thought about the girl in Macon cutting apart her mother's dresses. The girl had known, the way you know things before language is available for them, that the clothes were language. That they were the most honest thing. That you could say in fabric what was too true to say in words. She had spent 30 years learning to say it. The door opened and Sterling was there, jacket still on from the front row, looking at her with the particular expression she had come to know as his, the one that was not adoration, which would have felt like pressure, but recognition. The expression of a man who saw her clearly and liked, specifically and without reservation, what he saw. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She looked at the rack. She looked at him. She thought about the studio on Edgewood Avenue and the girl in Macon and Paris in October, and a Tuesday morning when she filed papers that rearranged the shape of her life. And a February morning with coffee getting cold on the table in a room full of her own choices. "Complete," she said. He smiled. He crossed the room and stood beside her, not in front of her, and they looked at the collection together, the work of her hands, the record of who she was, and the room held them both, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly right. The end.